Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Very happy to be with you here on this Friday afternoon with two very fine hours of radio ahead of us. Second hour, Jimmy Akin will be here. We're going to do weird questions with Jimmy Akin. That's always fun when we get to do weird questions, and I've previewed them, and they are adequately weird. I had to make sure that the questions that Jimmy had gathered from the various parts of the internet were truly weird, and they are weird. So we'll do weird questions second hour with Jimmy. First hour, bioethics. And if you have a bioethics question, a question about the proper treatment of human life in any stage and in any condition, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. And you know who we always have on when we're talking about bioethics. We decide, well, let's just get the best. And that's Father Tad Pacholczyk, who earned a doctorate in neuroscience from Yale University, did postdoctoral work at Harvard, and is a priest of the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts, and he serves now as the Director of Education at the National Catholic Bioethics Center in Philadelphia. Father Tad Pacholczyk, thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, Cy. Oh, it's great to be able to join you.
Not good news on the assisted suicide front, however. New Mexico has become the latest state to approve assisted suicide.
Yes, that's right. Unfortunately, they passed something called End of Life Options Act. I think it was yesterday. And this makes New Mexico basically the ninth state plus the District of Columbia, so 10 U.S. jurisdictions where it is now legal for doctors to basically prescribe a toxin to somebody who asks for it, and then that individual can use that to end their own life. So it's amazing that this, continues to expand. I think there was really a strong effort, really a heroic effort in New Mexico to try to keep this back and prevent it, and they had in the past managed to prevent this from becoming law a number of times, but apparently yesterday there was enough negotiating and so on that it did finally become law.
I'm sorry to hear it. It's a mistake we're going to keep making, I think, until I suppose the thing to say is we just have to keep making the case against it. And it certainly has fallen on Catholic bishops in many places to make the case against it. I imagine they probably ask you and the National Catholic Bioethics Center for advice and help in doing that. What do you say about how to make the case against assisted suicide?
Well, a lot of times we are approached by those in the medical profession because I think they feel most intensely the contradiction. And I mean, you're right, the bishops as well have a great concern around this. But I think when you're a physician, you realize that this is something that's pulling you into what we call the categories of cooperation and evil. You become the one that the person comes to request a prescription for this substance that you will use to end your own life. And of course, doctors have to be able to conscientiously object to this, which, in most places, I believe that's still possible for them to do. It hasn't been forced upon them. But, it raises this tremendously contradictory posture where, on the one hand, the physician is a healer and trying to care for the life of the patient in front of him. And then, on the other hand, he's becoming, an accessory to killing. And providing the very instruments via which that killing will occur, that self-killing through suicide. So I think once one begins to, see that tension at the heart of the medical profession, and this is something that harkens right back to the Hippocratic Oath, which is a pre-Christian oath. It's not a specifically Christian view of medicine, and doctors are oftentimes very, very uncomfortable when this kind of legislation becomes law.
There will be enough that are comfortable with it, however, to mean that it will have lethal consequences for many who are quite vulnerable, often elderly and depressed, or facing other serious physical problems and depressed. But we sometimes now see assisted suicide just suggested as a cure for depression.
Unfortunately, you're right. I think the depression piece is one of the risks here that people sort of talk around. It is possible, at the end of life when you're struggling with some serious ailments, that some people do struggle with physiological depression, and there's a need for them to receive appropriate antidepressant interventions to help clear that fog, as it were. But in the midst of that, it's not at all surprising that some would request to have their own lives ended, to have the tools made available to them to do that. And of course, once somebody receives good antidepressant medication, that is likely to lift that cloud, and they will no longer be requesting that their own life be ended.
Our number is 888-318-7884. If you want to talk about assisted suicide, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. But if you want to talk about any other bioethics issue, Father Tad Pacholczyk is our guest. He's from the National Catholic Bioethics Center, a world leader in thought and in educating others on the proper care for human life in all of its stages and all of its conditions. So maybe you have a question about the proper treatment for disease, maybe you have a question about something that comes from early childhood, late adulthood, wherever, in any stage of life, if you have a bioethics question, 888-318-7884. I suppose the obvious thing, too, is that many such questions have to do with human reproduction. If you have questions in that area, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. I'm old enough, Father, to remember when people who advocated for suicide were kind of at the margins. I remember learning about the Hemlock Society and thinking, this is even as a child, this is kind of a marginal group. They changed their name to Compassion and Choices, and now they've got millions of dollars in budget, and this whole thing has become mainstream. Do you have any insight into how that happened?
That's a great question. I think that it has been really a kind of patient effort on the part of advocates. They have been pushed back and defeated many times in many different states over the years, but I've been, surprised by their endurance, their persistence in trying to get this kind of legislation passed. And I think it's just been, a matter of staying with their agenda, which they have been remarkably good at. And I think also, among many people, there hasn't been an opportunity to talk this through as carefully as we should. And people have a kind of immediate visceral reaction where they say something like, well, gee, if somebody is suffering a lot, shouldn't we just let them put themselves out of their own misery kind of, view, rather than really looking at the problem of suffering and addressing that and saying also, look, at the end of life, isn't it important that we, take care of people right up until the point that the Lord calls them home? And that means through things like hospice, through good palliative care, where we address their pain needs, etc. So there's a lot of tools in our armamentarium, but I think we don't really talk about it and sort of inform people, and so that emotional response steps in, and emotion then substitutes for clear thinking, as so often happens in these bioethical debates.
Well, that's a problem across our whole society when we don't have. I don't think we have public media corporations that encourage intelligent debate about things. There's a kind of childishness to the whole thing, even to the evening news, that we're just really only appealing to the emotional level. We're not interested in having an intellectual debate. But I won't.
I'm afraid.
Oh, go ahead, Father.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right. I think that it's interesting. Even as I look back on my own work as a bioethicist, when I first started out in the early 2000s, excuse me, a lot of times I was invited to participate in debates. In those days it was often debates on embryonic stem cell research. And so, there'd be a university, there'd be some institution of higher learning. They would find a person on the opposite side. I would have, a good debate with that person in front of a group of students. And you felt like, there was some real dialogue and exchange that occurred here. And it was important for the students to see that and to process it themselves. And in recent years, very little of that. Very rare that I get invited to that kind of an event anymore. I think universities are afraid of that kind of open and free discourse. Rather, they have an agenda that they have to be faithful to, and they have to construct, their curriculum around it. They have to be very careful that they don't allow alternative voices. And it's becoming, in my opinion, a kind of echo chamber in many of our universities, and the opportunity no longer exists for this kind of meaningful discussion of substantive issues.
Our guest is Father Tad Pacholczyk, who I have to say, in the years that I have known him, is one of the most temperate speakers that I have ever listened to, reasonable. And if he says that atmosphere is persisting on college campuses, I would sit up and listen. This is not a flamethrower saying this. This is a very well-reasoned person who doesn't go for flamethrowing saying that. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back with your calls for Father Tad Pacholczyk, 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Unplanned, the true story of Abby Johnson.
I would be the youngest director in Planned Parenthood history.
She believed in a woman's right to choose.
I've had an abortion myself, so I don't have any problem with another woman making the same decision.
Until the day she saw something that changed everything.
Tiny, perfect little baby. And then it was just gone.
Now she's pulling back the curtain on the abortion industry. Unplanned.
Available at EWTNRC.com and the EWTN app.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Father Tad Pacholczyk is our guest. Father is a scientist and an ethicist, and he's the director of education over at the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And you're welcome to call with your bioethics questions, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. I'm going to start with Luke in Great Falls, Montana. Luke, thank you very, very much for your call. Go ahead, Luke, with your question for Father Tad. I just got to make sure I got the right button. Luke, are you with us? No? All right. I know I have the right button. Luke, are you there with us?
I'm talking. You can't hear me.
Oh, now we got you. Okay, sorry. Now
you got you?
Yep, there's some kind of technical problem. Go ahead with your question for Father Tad Pacholczyk.
So, I am just wondering why you believe people with different, religious beliefs shouldn't have the right to their own life. If they're suffering, I believe that it is just super obvious that people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if in your life you lose the liberty to pursue happiness, you should have the right to take your life. And that's kind of how I see the situation.
All right,
I used to be a Catholic. Yeah.
Okay, Luke, I'm going to let you have a conversation with Father. So let's let him get a response, and then I'll come back to you, Luke.
Yeah, Luke, I think you're articulating a widely held view, and I think you've put it very straightforwardly. And I think the mistake with that view, the key mistake, would be the supposition that my life is only and exclusively my own. I think, that's the temptation for us to think, when in reality we did not confer life upon ourselves. We rather discover it as a kind of gift that each of us has received, and we recognize that there are certain responsibilities that go along with that gift, one of which is, this instinctual, deeply seated recognition that we should preserve our lives and take care of it, but also be responsible stewards of the gift. So, a lot of people, we live in a very kind of exercise-conscious society, and, eat well and so on. Why do people recognize a duty in any of those directions? Because they recognize they have responsibilities towards themselves, things they should be doing. Or we say, don't abuse drugs. Well, why not? Well, because your life and your body is a great gift that you have duties and responsibilities towards. So, if you just outlined it as a kind of radical autonomy view of things, which, is tempting, I think, for many people to do, then we go down this rabbit hole, very dark rabbit hole, of just saying anything goes anytime and, against myself. But, the same kind of logic then will also move in other directions, where we'll start to say we should be able to, harm others if that gets in the way of my own fulfillment, etc. There's a flawed logic that stands right at the core of that particular view of things. So I think people will say, well, we're entitled to our own reality here, but that's not really how it works. We actually have a shared reality with everybody, and part of that shared reality includes our shared human nature and our duties towards ourselves.
Luke, what do you make of that?
Okay, I actually like your argument. I think the idea that if you want to live, you should use your gifts is actually elegant and beautiful. But you see, the thing is, you have the axiom that life is a gift, but on the contrary, it's possible that life could be perceived as a curse if someone were to experience enough suffering that, they wouldn't want to keep living. So I think it's only valid that you recognize those people who might not have as good of a life as yours. And yes, we all share certain traits, such as self-preservation. I believe I have a biochemistry degree, and evolutionarily speaking, that is a highly favorable trait, where if you don't have self-preservation, you're most likely not going to pass on your genes now. I mean, that's just one opinion. I don't think it's fair to say, there was something you said. Yeah.
Well, Luke, let me let Father.
Okay,
thank you for, and also thank you for that very respectful tone. Father, what do you make of what Luke just said?
Well, I think Luke is raising the fundamental question, really at the heart of this, which is the question of suffering, and what does it mean as human beings for us to respond in an intelligent way to suffering? Should we kind of short-circuit our own existence or participate in the short-circuiting of other people's lives? Is that a rational kind of an answer? Would a person who thinks rationally really support that kind of view? And the medical tradition, which, is considered one of the most intellectual areas, really, of, professional expertise, that profession has long recognized that kind of short-circuiting through physician-assisted suicide is not a good answer, that what we should be doing instead is doubling down and saying, look, what kinds of tools do we have here to help people who are suffering, and address that through pain medications. And we have really amazing pain medications now. I often say to people, morphine is a kind of miracle drug. It's so helpful to many people, for example, with advanced cancers and so on, which, several hundred years ago, this was not something that was readily available. And we have tremendous number of blessings in terms of the advances of medicine and surgery and other interventions. And those kinds of efforts are what we should be always focusing on, and loving then one another and supporting one another in our hard times. Because you see, the other thing I think we have to acknowledge about suffering is that suffering touches the lives of all of us. And if we're going to set up a demand that there should be no suffering, that is not a possibility. I mean, all of us experience it at different points in our lives, and the answer becomes, will I grow through this moment of challenge? And, I've spoken to many elderly people who look back on their lives, and they will very honestly say to me, the only times that I really changed as a human being, looking back on my own life, was when I went through some hard times, whether, it was during my time in Vietnam and I was struggling with this or that, or whether it was during this time when I had this terrible sickness that I had to contend with, or, when I was going through my divorce, or whether it was, and they'll tell you what it was, and they'll say, it was very difficult to go through, but it changed me, and I actually grew in ways that I never imagined were possible. And I think that's where, the grace of suffering can be discovered. It's not to say that suffering is a good, but rather that we as humans have a way of approaching and dealing with suffering that makes us different from animals. When a horse suffers, you pull out the revolver. And that's all the horse, that's the only thing you can do in the face of that. We are not horses. We don't pull out revolvers in those cases. We recognize as humans that we have so much more to bring to this, and so much depth of who we are and the possibilities of grace on top of all of that from our Lord, who showed us the path of suffering and, a redemptive path through that thicket, if you will.
Luke, I'm going to leave it there and invite you to call anytime. It's just that there are lots of folks on the line who would like to talk with Father Tad, and we're talking about bioethics, and a bunch of different topics will come up. I would like to offer you a book, because you said you were Catholic and you've moved on to other things, but maybe sometime you'll consider moving back, and we have a book we'd love to give you. It's called The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It, by our own Jimmy Akin. If you hang on the line and give us an address, we'll send you that book. And also, I hope you'll call again, Luke, because you're a great person to have a conversation with. Father, you live in Philadelphia. I don't believe that you're pulling out a revolver even if a horse is sick. As a matter of fact, don't pull out a revolver in the city of Philadelphia, Father. That's a terrible mistake.
Yes, good point. I'm just kind of, talking about farm life, perhaps. I think those who
all right.
have been out in the woods.
Yeah, take your horse to the vet if you're in Philadelphia. As a matter of fact, what are you even doing with a horse in Philadelphia? All right, up next in Garden City, Kansas, listening on 100.5 FM. Jeanette, thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Father Tad.
Hey, yeah. So I teach human development. And every time I get to where we talk about ectopic pregnancies, I'm always very interested to know what the Catholic perspective is on how to care for the mother when there is an ectopic pregnancy, specifically a tubal pregnancy that oftentimes could end in, that sometimes resolves itself, unfortunately, and it's always a very difficult situation, but sometimes ends in internal bleeding for the mother and stuff like that. And I read some about it, and I read of a Catholic coalition of healthcare providers that terminate pregnancies due to that very unfortunate situation. But I was just wondering what the perspective is on that.
Jeanette, I'm so glad that you called to talk to Father Tad Pacholczyk about this, and I have to tell you, terrible thing. The phone line just cut out right in the middle of your question, so we're gonna get him back on the line, okay? And so,
okay.
Wait, no, we have him back on the line. Father, we have you with us?
Yes, and actually, I think I heard the majority of the question.
Oh, good.
As well.
So, what does the Church teach on ectopic pregnancies?
Yes, so Jeanette is raising one of the more kind of tricky and challenging situations around pregnancy, when you have a child, for example, who does not implant into the uterus but implants in the fallopian tube, that is a potentially very dangerous situation, because that fallopian tube, it's relatively thin tissue. It'll expand a little bit as the baby grows, but then there's a danger of rupture. And so the question becomes, can we, for example, do a measure, take steps that would directly attack that growing child or not? And, so I think we should probably get into some of the subtleties of this on the other side of the break.
Jeanette,
but clearly the Church's main view is that we should not engage in any kind of direct abortion.
So hang on, Jeanette, because we do have to take this quick break. We'll be right back with more with Father Tad Pacholczyk.
Call us now with your question on Catholic Answers Live.
According to divine command, we should give God worship, but how do we know if we're doing it right? Is worship a form of self-help to make me feel better, a form of social activism, or even a commodity? Or is it something that transcends all of those? In Real Religion, How to Avoid False Faith and Worship God in Spirit and Truth, Father Jeff Kirby cuts through the misguided modern notions about God and religion and takes you back to the foundation for true worship, God's revelation about himself. From his first contact with his chosen people to the culmination of his revelation in Jesus Christ, God shows us what religion is supposed to be like and how to make the practice of it a lifelong virtue in our lives. Order your copy of Real Religion by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Jesus told us to carry our cross daily.
Does yours sometimes seem too heavy?
That's our topic on Monday on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now more of Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Don't forget, second hour, we're going to do Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. This hour, bioethics with Father Tad Pacholczyk from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And on the line is Jeanette in Kansas with a question about the Church's teaching on ectopic pregnancies. Father, you had gotten as far in your answer as saying, the first thing is we don't attack innocent human life.
Yes, exactly. That because we have what are called these maternal-fetal conflicts, sometimes people will try to say, oh, well, that means then it's okay to do an abortion, a direct abortion. And the Church says always that it's never okay to attack one person for the benefit of another. It's never okay to kill one person, even if it might help somebody else out. So in a situation with an ectopic pregnancy, what are you permitted to do? What kind of medical interventions would make sense and would be morally permissible? Well, what you are permitted to do, there's this recognition that because the growing baby is lodged in the wrong place, that fallopian tube tissue has now become pathological and is in imminent danger of bursting and the woman potentially bleeding to death and both the mother and the child dying. And because of that pathological situation, it would be allowable to cut out the fallopian tube on that side where the pregnancy is. And what that means is that the woman will lose her fertility on that side. But notice that what you're doing, and this is allowable under the principle of double effect, is you are resolving the pathology in the mother's body by acting on her body, namely the fallopian tube, and secondarily recognizing that the baby that is inside that tube will end up dying, but not directly attacking that baby as one would do through an abortion, where, for example, you might go in and dismember the child in an attempt to resolve the ectopic pregnancy. So that's called a salpingectomy, and that procedure is morally permissible when it's clear that one is approaching a situation in which that pregnancy, that ectopic pregnancy, is now a threat to the life of the mother and the child.
Jeanette, is that clear to you?
That is, yeah, that's very interesting logic there. And yeah, absolutely. Yep.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the call. We're talking bioethics this hour with Father Tad Pacholczyk. You're welcome to call if you have a bioethics question, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. We go now to Freehold, New Jersey. Vincent in Freehold, New Jersey, listening on 89.3 FM. You are up. Go ahead with your question for Father Tad.
Yes, good evening, Father. How are you?
Doing well. How are you,
I have
Vincent?
a question about. Okay, there's something that's weighing heavy on my heart, and I'm upset that we're kind of being forced to try to take this COVID-19 vaccine, especially come to find out that there's aborted fetal tissue in this vaccine, especially in the Johnson & Johnson brand. And like our church made the announcement that it's important to take the vaccine, and in my heart, it's such a sin, being that we're not supposed to believe in an abortion, that you have this injected in our body on a disease that's 99 or 98.9% curable on its own. I don't see how important it is for us to have this vaccine, especially with the ingredients that's in there that could possibly cause more harm in the near future.
Okay, Vincent, hang on. Father?
Yeah, great question, Vincent. Maybe just one small clarification. You mentioned it during your question that the Johnson & Johnson has cells from aborted fetuses in it. That actually is not correct. There are not any cells from abortions in the vaccine. So people will say, oh, am I being injected with cells from an abortion? And the answer is no. It is definitely no. You are not being injected with those cells. However, those cells were involved in an earlier stage of the manufacturing of the vaccine. But you are not being injected with them. I think it's important to be clear about that because there are some websites out there that are not being careful and confusing people on precisely that point. So the question then that you're raising, which is a very important question, is this: if a particular vaccine relies on cell lines from an abortion, and the abortion happened about 50 years ago in the Netherlands, is that a problem in terms of my receiving the vaccine? And so what the church has done is looked at this question. Actually, the church has issued 3 major documents since 2005, and all those documents said basically the same thing. They said, well, this is not the ideal for how we should be making our vaccines. We should be pressuring pharmaceutical companies to stop using these cells, and that means we should be writing letters, etc., and pushing back against the continued use of these cells. And I'll just mention that for people who are interested in doing that, on my website, fathertad.com, and also on the National Catholic Bioethics Center website, which is ncbcenter.org, we actually have template letters where you can take those and send them, put your own signature on it, send them or email them to the particular pharmaceutical companies. But so is it the case that if somewhere in the manufacturing process they relied on these cell lines from an abortion, does that mean it's wrong for me to be vaccinated? And the church has very clearly articulated and looked at this, as I say, in all three of those documents, and concluded that as an end user, it is allowable to receive that vaccine if you have a serious reason to do so. And for certain people, COVID-19 does represent a serious health threat. If you're an individual who is elderly and who has some of the comorbidities, such as obesity, diabetes, etc., some lung ailments perhaps, that makes you an individual who is most likely to be seriously affected by COVID-19, and a vaccine may be a very, very reasonable kind of a choice for you to make. And you are allowed to receive a vaccine, even if it happens to be one of those vaccines, like the Johnson & Johnson, that was made using a cell line from an abortion. So that has been the church's position. And part of the reason for that is that when you get the jab in the arm, you are not cooperating with that abortion that happened, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That abortion is over and done with, and the cells from that abortion just continue to grow in different laboratories around the world. And if you do object as you are given the vaccine, and take steps to register your disapproval of the way it was made, that is the kind of direction we need to be charting going forward in biomedical science, so that we don't rely on these cells in the future for more vaccine production. So I hope that clarifies it, Vincent, because the church is definitely open to vaccination and recognizes, though, that this is a problem in terms of how some vaccines are made. And one last point, if you have two vaccines, one of which is made by relying on these cell lines and another one that's not, and you have equal access to both of them, and they both happen to be equally effective, equally safe, et cetera, well, then in a case like that, of course, it would make more sense for you to choose the vaccine that has less or no association with abortion. And you're free to do that and should do that if all other things are equal. Now, a lot of times they're not equal. Maybe in your town, they only have one vaccine available. So, you won't have the option of choosing between different vaccines. But, just to understand that the moral reasoning here, the thinking around this, is that we want to see this change, and the church is very, very insistent about that point.
Vincent, thank you so much. I'm sure that many, many people shared the same question. I really appreciate that you called with it. We have to take a very quick break. We do have a free ebook for you for the Easter season. It's called A Walk Through the Bible. If you'd like it, just go to shop.catholic.com, look for the button at the top of the page, and download your free copy of our free ebook, A Walk Through the Bible, at shop.catholic.com.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The power of prayer depends on God's action, not on our praying. The Holy Spirit prays within us with groanings too deep for words, as Romans 8 says. And He empowers us to seek God and to seek from Him all that we need. And the answer to prayers are always from God in order to worship Him.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Father Tad Pacholczyk from the National Catholic Bioethics Center is here with us to answer your bioethics question. We go now to Dale in Boston, Massachusetts. Dale, thank you so much for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Father Tad Pacholczyk.
Thank you very much. This is something I've wondered for a while, but there hasn't really been a show that specifically addressed it, so I'm glad it does today. My question's on anxiety, and specifically anxiety medication. I know that for some people, their anxiety is a real source of sort of moral, almost destruction. It really holds them back in their faith life, and after taking an anti-anxiety medicine, it has helped them to sort of feel forgiveness more, things like that. Whereas other people use that anxiety almost as the means of seeking God's grace. And I'm reminded of the story of two monks, both of whom had sort of fallen off the path and were told to stay in their cells and pray. And one came out looking like a death because he thought of life without Christ, and the other came out looking radiant, thinking of life with Christ. And both were right. Both brought them back to the path. And my question is there really any thought, for or against anxiety medication in regards to sort of that spiritual, thinking of it from that spiritual lens?
Yeah, Dale, I think, what the church's approach here would be largely driven by a kind of medical consideration, believe it or not. In other words, that the church would say, well, to the extent that you have a situation mentally of disorder and you have a tool that will help bring a higher level of order and, in the case of anxiety, some peace and so on, if that can be done with the assistance of pharmacological tools, with anti-anxiety medications, and as long as the side effects are not, too troublesome themselves, because I think you're aware, as so many of us are, that a number of the antipsychotic type drugs do sometimes have side effects that can be of concern, including in a few rare instances, even generating suicidal thoughts, that kind of thing. But to the extent that you have a relatively safe drug, and you have a, serious impairment that somebody is struggling with mentally, these drugs really should be seen as a great blessing that help people to find a kind of more level and ordered existence as they go forward. And I think that'll apply, as you're sort of hinting, even in the spiritual domain, that a lot of times you may have people who get caught up in things like scruples or anxiety or, other things that they almost can't function. And with the assistance of some of these powerful drugs, they may be given a new lease on life and a certain ability to see with clarity their own situation. I remember a friend that I had who struggled with depression, and it was really heavy-duty depression, and he tried a number of antidepressant drugs and finally went on to lithium. And he said to me, after being on lithium for then, I think, 25 years, he said, lithium saved my life. It has been such a blessing for me, this drug, and I thank God for it. So, for some people, when you find the right drug, and sometimes it's tricky to find exactly the right one, but it can be a very, very great blessing.
Dale, does that help you?
It does. I'd like to, if I may, just a very, very short follow-up with that. In my personal experience, it's very, I almost find myself a little more prayerful when I don't take one because of that anxiety almost, that sort of sense of grief that comes with it at times. And when I do take one, perhaps I pray a little less. I'm a little less concerned maybe about the fire and brimstone, but I am more at peace. Do you think that's all right?
Boy, that's a hard question. I think there you're asking a question a little bit about whether it really is a state of disorder that you're facing. If it's something very mild, we all have anxieties when stressors come into our lives. And so if you're talking about something that falls in the range of the normal, then I think we would say, there may not really be a need for some of these powerful drugs. But, there's going to be some judgment calls about whether there is impairment in the way that an individual is able to conduct their affairs. I think that'll be the critical determinant a lot of times as to whether they should seek out, assistance pharmacologically.
Dale, I feel like we could have a much longer conversation, and I'm really grateful for the call because it's something that many, many people want to ask about. Not many people do. So I think you've been very helpful to many people, Dale. If there are more questions, you have follow-up questions, call us on another day. We'll do our very best. But thank you so much. I'm just looking at a full bank of phones here, and I want to get as many on with Father as I can. So we'll go to Omaha, Nebraska. Vida, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Okay, so I am Catholic, and I have multiple sclerosis, but it was very, very bad. And in the meantime, I did a research study to make my MS better. But my question is whether or not when I die, I would love to donate, not love, but I would really like to donate my brain and stem cell to give to the donation place to have research done in it so that this disease can be stopped one way or another. I've already done research, but I'd like to do this again because I have like 55 lesions in my brain, and I would like them to find some kind of cure for this terrible disease.
But
is that a bad thing to do?
There we go. Is it wrong to donate your body for scientific research like that, Father?
Yeah, great question. And Vita, really, there is not a problem with doing this. Typically, when somebody in your situation would donate something like the brain, it'll often be the case that will be of use from the point of view of dissections. It's not likely that they will be able to use your brain after you've died to isolate cells. Typically, that's not what's done, but the dissection process can be very helpful and can be, illuminating in terms of understanding disease progression and so on. And so your willingness to make your body available to researchers in the field of multiple sclerosis that's a charitable move on your part, and you certainly are permitted by the Church to do that. And in general, donating one's body to science is allowable. What I often remind people, though, is that when you do something like this, it is good to inquire about the final disposition of the body, because some universities and some research centers will arrange for cremation of the body after they have completed their research, and then they will make sure that the ashes are returned to the family so that there can be, burial of the ashes at the cemetery, and your family will have a place to go and pray. And that's important to look into that and be sure that, that there's some kind of appropriate disposition for your body after the research has been conducted.
I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you so much for your call and your question. Lots of folks to get to. I'm going to keep moving. Our number, I'm not going to give our number. Our guest is Father Tad Pacholczyk from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Up next is Ben in Fenton, Texas, listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Ben, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you guys for taking the call. Father Tad, I hope this isn't too science fiction, but I was wondering how you thought future technology, looking as far ahead as you want, would change and shape the debates that we're having now. For instance, there's a lot in abortion about, well, when is it permissible? Obviously for us, never. But that debate back about, well, it's being forced on the mother to carry it. Well, at some point, we'll be able to viably care for an embryo from conception. Inconceivably. So would that change it, or would it be more like stem cells today where we have adult stem cells and yet embryonic stem cells still get used where they're not really needed?
Okay, Ben, I just want to let you know there's no such thing as too science fiction. That's not a category here. But go ahead, Father. How would you address that?
Yeah, well, I think it is a good question, and I don't think it's too sci-fi in the sense that there were some reports recently about work in Israel where they were able to gestate mouse embryos to quite a late stage of gestation in special bottles. that were perfused with oxygen. So, we are developing the technology to be able to gestate earlier and earlier human life. So the day might come when, for example, if a woman got pregnant, that she could say, well, I don't want to carry this pregnancy. Could you remove the pregnancy and place the baby into a bottle and gestate the baby? And, I would say that one would have to evaluate each of those situations on their own merits. There would have to be some legitimate medical reason in terms of a threat to the mother or to the baby that would allow for that kind of separation of mother from child. And I do think if that technology becomes available, what I think you're asking, Ben, is will this sort of open up the mystery of the womb a little bit and make it more apparent to us of the evil that we are choosing whenever we choose a direct abortion, to destroy a fellow human being in the womb. And I think it would. I think that there would be another level of visualization here. A lot of times we play games with ourselves and try to avoid really what's at the heart of abortion. But I think that technology would sort of bring it front and center in a new way. That's not to say that I think the technology is good in terms of, for example, gestating a human being as an embryo, putting sperm and egg together like they do for in vitro, and then gestating that baby all the way in, so to speak, in a bottle. That would not be appropriate, in my opinion. That would raise serious concerns about, objectifying human beings and the way that we bring them into the world, which we're already doing when we create human life in glassware, which is something we should never do. And that's why the Church, from the beginning, has always insisted that in vitro fertilization is an immoral way to bring new human life into the world, should only be in the marital embrace of husband and wife, and that child gestating in his or her mother's womb.
Ben, how was all that for you? Does that make sense?
That was fantastic. And if I could ask a quick follow-up, is there anything that you think would be a new issue that you think technology might present in the future?
Ben, you got to write your own science fiction novel. I see what you're doing here. You're trying to get Father to give you a plot for your science fiction novel. I don't know have you got anything for him, Father?
On that issue, it's hard to say. For example, one idea where I think this would be helpful and could change things would be in relation to one of the earlier callers. What if you had an ectopic pregnancy and you were able to go into the fallopian tube and relocate it into the uterus and actually have that baby grow where it's supposed to grow? That would be really fantastic. That would be some very sophisticated surgery in the womb.
But not as sophisticated as growing a person for the entire gestation period, I wouldn't think. Maybe that would come sooner.
Yeah, you're right. I think that the proposal to create and gestate a human being all the way from, the 0 point, as it were, until 9 months, that is a hugely complicated proposal. And we're very, very far away from doing that. Even in mice, we still have quite a ways to go before we can do that. But humans, I think this is decades away.
Ben, thanks. Appreciate the call. I hope you call again if we can help you on the plot of your next novel. Father Tad Pacholczyk has been our guest. You can find him at the National Catholic Bioethics Center if you just search National Catholic Bioethics Center. But the website, I think, is nccbcenter.org. Is that right?
It's actually 1C, ncbcenter.org, and also fathertad.com they can check.
Father, may we have your blessing before we go?
Absolutely. May Almighty God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. It's always great. Thank you so much. It's a great service you do us, Father. Thanks, and I hope we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much, Cy. Great to be with you.
Coming up next, Jimmy Akin. We're going to do weird questions with Jimmy Akin. I've got a preview of them, and they are weird, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Finish out the work week right after this on Catholic Answers Live. About to get weird in here. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. And it's not because of our guest that it's about to get weird. Jimmy Akin is our guest. He's senior apologist here. But we've got weird questions for Jimmy. And that's why we call this hour Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy. How's it going, Cy Kellett?
It's going very well, thank you. And I just had an inspiration. I think when we do the game show on Friday, we have special game show music. I think we need some Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin music. Is this my first? And I think it's got to be theremin. A little bit of, don't you think? A little bit
that would be okay.
Yeah.
Now, for folks who may not know, a theremin is a kind of electronic instrument that is used in some science fiction movies, like Forbidden Planet, and it makes this woo noise, which may be the origin of the phrase woo-woo, which is often used to describe strange, unusual claims.
I think, Sarah, thank you for being here and running the board. Can you research theremin music? But it's got to be in the public domain. We're not paying for theremin music. Although we maybe should pay for it, because I imagine professional theremin players are not making a killing.
Probably not. Not these days.
No,
it's not the 50s anymore.
Maybe a little employment for a theremin player would be good. I almost gave out the number. I'm not allowed to give out the number. Sarah, just tell me to stop if I start giving out the number, because all of our questions have already been submitted via the internet and its various avenues. Jimmy has very kindly gathered them up for us, and they're all weird. And that's our theme, weird questions for Jimmy Akin. Sometimes, every now and then, we get a call and the person will go, this is a weird question, but I wanted to ask you anyways. And generally speaking, the calls, they're not that weird. They'll be relatively normal, at least by our standards, Jimmy. Maybe the people don't know just exactly how weird we're willing to get.
We're willing to get very weird. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Jimmy handles a lot of weird stuff on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, his podcast, and we just have a lot of fun with weird questions. So we gather them up and we do this. The podcast, by the way, today I have not watched the episode. I haven't decided if I'm going to listen to the episode. It's on spontaneous human combustion.
That's right, yes. And for people who may not know what that is, occasionally there are reports, they're rare, but there are reports of people who catch on fire for no apparent reason, and almost all of the body is reduced to ashes, but parts of it may strangely survive, especially the feet, and there's virtually no fire damage anywhere else in the room except like maybe the chair they're sitting on.
It's terrifying. It's terrifying to think what this world might contain that we don't know about. All right, you want to do some weird questions, Jimmy?
That's what I'm here for.
Oh, I guess that's true, huh? Gregory said this. How would someone participate in the resurrection at the second coming if they were to have fallen into a black hole or gone near enough to one that time stopped for them relative to everyone else? It has been my impression that the resurrection is supposed to happen for everyone simultaneously. Maybe I am wrong, but how can this be given that time is relative?
So the church obviously doesn't have a teaching here. This is a matter of speculation. It is generally understood that the resurrection will occur for all human beings at the same time. Now, Scripture clearly indicates that it's going to apply to all human beings who are here on earth at the time of the second coming. We don't really have a statement of Scripture or the magisterium that addresses what would happen to people who are not on earth, but since it seems to apply to the whole human race, the logical assumption would be that it's going to be everybody. So as a way of getting at this question, let's talk about time dilation. Time dilation is something that occurs, according to Einstein's theories of relativity, when you either get in a strong gravitational field or when you start accelerating and moving faster. And so if you're here on Earth, on the surface of the Earth, you're deeper down into Earth's gravity well than you would be if you were up in a plane or, let's say, a hot air balloon just floating above the Earth. And time actually does run slower for those of us who are here on the surface than it does for people who are up in the sky. They've actually measured this with atomic clocks. It's a very tiny amount. It's like, a teeny little fraction of a second, but it really is true. It's been confirmed. The same thing happens if you're accelerating, if you're moving faster and faster, and they can measure that too. And in fact, if they don't correct for this time dilation, which is where time stretches and gets slower, if they don't correct for this phenomenon with our satellites, the GPS in your phone will stop working within a day or two. It won't be accurate anymore. So they have to constantly correct for this.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's suppose, before we get to the black hole, let's suppose you get on a spaceship and it goes really fast. You're accelerating. You get near the speed of light, so time slows down. And if you hit the speed of light, it would actually stop. Well, the whole rest of the universe is still going on around you. You're just not aging as fast. You're not experiencing as much time, but you're still part of the universe. And so consequently, when the second coming happens, no matter where you are or how fast time is running for you at the moment, God can grab you out of that spaceship and judge you. So that's not a problem in and of itself. So now let's apply that to what happens with time in a strong gravitational field like a black hole has. Now, the thing about black holes is they have so much mass that the gravity they generate is able to stop light from leaving them, because remember, time slows down. And so if time is slowing down, then the light's not traveling as fast, and eventually if time stops, the light can't go anywhere, so it can't come out of the black hole. And if you go into a black hole, well, okay, realistically, what would happen under ordinary circumstances is you would just die, because as you go into a black hole, your body is, all the matter in your body is stretched out, and it's a phenomenon called spaghettification, because you get made like spaghetti, and eventually you're just a stream of atoms with no physical form. And so at that point you would die and your soul would go to heaven. But suppose that didn't happen. Suppose you somehow survived, and so you're in the black hole and you still have your body and time is stopped. Well, the reason that black holes are black is because the light can't escape. And that's because of the mass that the black hole has, and that's related to the strength of gravity, to the gravitational constant of the universe. Also, the speed of light is thought to be governed by two properties that space has. One of them is known as vacuum permittivity, and the other is vacuum permeability. And so we've got like three physical constants that are governing the fact you can't get out of the black hole. But the physical constants of the universe are under God's control, and they could be different than they are. And so God can simply change the constants if he needs to and pluck you out of the black hole and judge you. So I would say, on the very reasonable assumption that this is going to happen to everybody, at the same time, if you're in a black hole or in a spaceship that's severely time dilated, God will grab you wherever you are.
I am very grateful. Thanks very much for the question. I appreciate that. But I was thinking, spaghettification is bad enough, but spaghettification and then you can't participate in the resurrection, that would be awful. So,
yeah.
I'm Gregory. I'm glad that one worked out. Thanks for the weird question. We're going to take a break. I want to let you know that the newest School of Apologetics course, Evidence for the Church, from Tim Staples, is available, and it's 50% off for the entire month of April. 50% off. You just go to schoolofapologetics.com and get Evidence for the Church, the newest course from Tim Staples, schoolofapologetics.com.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Unplanned, the true story of Abby Johnson.
I would be the youngest director in Planned Parenthood history.
She believed in a woman's right to choose.
I've had an abortion myself, so I don't have any problem with another woman making the same decision.
Until the day she saw something that changed everything.
Tiny, perfect little baby. And then it was just gone.
Now she's pulling back the curtain on the abortion industry. Unplanned.
Available at EWTNRC.com and the EWTN app.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Weird questions with Jimmy Akin this hour. The questions have come to us via the internet and its various tools, and they're all weird, and Jimmy is here to answer them. So I won't be giving out the phone number. Just relax and enjoy the weird questions and the possibly weird answers. I do not know if this says something bad about me, Jimmy, but spaghettification makes me hungry. Mm-hmm. When you mention spaghettification, I all of a sudden I'm hungry.
It has that effect on a lot of people.
I'm going to go home
until you think seriously about what it involves and does to the human body. Then you might be less hungry.
Yeah, right. Exactly. All right. Martin has a very succinct but fascinating question. Martin, thank you for the question. What would happen if Adam and Eve had children before they fell?
Of course, it's a matter of speculation, but since human nature had not been damaged before the fall, it would have been able to perform its role, its original function that God intended us to be able to do of passing on sanctifying grace to offspring. And so the children would have inherited sanctifying grace. It would have functioned, basically, the marital act would have functioned as a kind of sacrament in communicating grace to the offspring. And so they would have been born unfallen and in a state of original innocence or original blessing. Now, what would have happened then is more speculative. Adam and Eve were given what theologians refer to as a period of probation, where they could disobey God, but they also had the option of obeying him. And the thought is that if they had chosen to obey him, if they had chosen not to fall into sin, then at some point they would have been confirmed in grace. And so it could be that the children, if they had been born without original sin, they might have been in the same state Adam and Eve were. They might have been in a probationary period where they had freedom to resist sin, but also freedom to sin. And if they passed the probationary period, then they might have been confirmed in grace also. However, it's also possible that, especially if Adam and Eve had been confirmed in grace, that their kids would have been born confirmed in grace as well. If they, though, had this period of probation, then we would be in a kind of interesting situation, because we know Adam and Eve eventually fell. So what would happen with these kids? Well, it could be that the kids might have had the ability to resist the fall. And so you could have a situation where you've got fallen parents and unfallen children, which would be very interesting. On the other hand, there's another theory that Adam specifically, or you could stretch it to Adam and Eve, are what are sometimes called the federal head of the human race. And the idea there is that as Adam or Adam and Eve go, so goes everybody else. And so it could be that if Adam fell, or if Adam and Eve fell, that effect would have rippled to their children, who then would have fallen as well, even if and lost the original innocence, even if they hadn't personally sinned. But all of this is speculation, so we don't really know.
Martin, thank you very, very much. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, and our guest, you'll be surprised to find out, is Jimmy Akin. Next weird question comes from Kyle. In the season finale of a popular TV show, a philosophical paradox known as the Ship of Theseus was alluded to. Having never heard of this, I did a web search. From what I can gather, it goes something like this. If you take the Ship of Theseus and you begin replacing its parts piece by piece, wooden board by wooden board, by the time you've replaced the entire ship, is it still the same ship? Is there a particularly Catholic and well-informed way to approach this question with our understanding of form, nature, and the soul? I understand that our physical bodies undergo a similar ongoing process, shedding and recycling out old dead cells and replacing them with new and better cells, yet I am still me. I don't know that all the cells that replace them are better. At my age, I think some of the new cells that have come in and are not as good as the old ones. But other than that, I'm down with the question.
Okay, so one aspect, and he accurately summarizes what the ship of Theseus is. It's a paradox that goes all the way back to the Greek philosophers, which is why it's got the name Theseus in it. And the idea is you've got this ship, and you start replacing it plank by plank, and eventually you've substituted new planks for all of the old ones. Is it the same ship? And one of the things that kind of adds an exclamation point or a zinger to this paradox is after you've replaced all the planks, if you've still got the original planks, you could reconstruct the original ship, and you'd have two ships. Which one is the ship of Theseus?
Oh, yeah.
And so philosophers have thought about this, and including Christian philosophers, and they've applied it to humans because our bodies do replace the cells that are in them over time. Here's how I would look at it. In the case of an artificial object like a ship, when you replace all of the parts in it, it can be considered the same ship. Let's say I'm Theseus, I'm the owner, and you replace a plank in it. Okay, you replaced one plank now, that's still my ship. Legally, that is my ship. And you keep replacing planks, and legally, it's always still my ship.
Yeah.
So in terms of categories of human convenience like legality, you can say, yeah, this is my ship. This is still the same ship effectively. If someone goes to the dumpster and gets out all the original planks and reconstructs a ship out of them, well, that's not my ship legally. That's somebody else's ship. It's, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. So whoever found the original planks and put them together again, that's their ship now. So I think there are ways of handling artificial objects like this. It becomes more interesting when we're talking about natural things like life forms, including human beings. And life forms have a soul, which is what enables them to be alive. And the soul does not get replaced when the individual parts are replaced. So I always have the same soul, even if every cell in my body changes out over time. Right. And so the soul is what a Christian philosopher would typically look to as the fundamental principle of continuity in an individual. Now, a question obviously comes up, well, what about with the resurrection of the dead? And, because when our bodies get put back together, because if we have had all kinds of matter processed through our bodies with all these different cells we've had in us over the course of our lifetimes, what happens when we come back from the dead? And the answer is we don't know. One of the things that's part of the discussion on this was a document that came out from the International Theological Commission a number of years ago on certain questions regarding the last things. And they pointed out that, the resurrection of the dead is an event that involves our physical bodies, but the church has never said it requires exactly the same matter to have our resurrected body. It doesn't necessarily require all of the same matter or even some of the same matter that was in there originally. It's hypothetically possible that just your soul attached to this matter makes it your body, regardless of what happened with the original matter. On the other hand, since we know that Jesus's body was not in the grave when he returned from the dead, and our resurrection is going to be like his, it would seem that at least in his case, and presumably in our case, a lot of that matter, at least that was in the grave, did end up in Jesus's resurrected body, and presumably the same thing would happen to us.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, because we can see there's such a short time period there that his body doesn't fall apart or doesn't decompose.
Doesn't decay. Yeah. Now, if someone's body did totally decay, God could still find whatever matter he needed that had been part of that person to make a resurrected body for them, or it could be that the soul is simply enough.
All right, next question. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin this hour. Next question comes from Bob. Mr. Akin, I have been pondering a question that I suspect only you are equipped to answer in a way I can understand. Recently, on an episode, you explained Olber's paradox. Since I first read about this idea several years ago in one of Stephen Hawking's books, I cannot help but think that it is in error. Mr. Akin, please tell me where I've gone wrong. It would seem to me that if the universe was of an infinite size and had no beginning, and the concentration of light sources throughout the universe is the same as we observe in our visible universe, then the night sky would look the same or very similar to what we see now. This would be due to the fact that as more and more stars exist further and further away from us, the light from those distant stars is increasingly dim. Ultimately, the light reaching us from those stars becomes infinitesimally small and imperceivable to the human eye. The rate of light reaching us on a nightly basis would be only marginally changed from what we see now, as distant stars could have rates of light sent to the Earth at 1 photon a year or a decade or a century. I have trouble believing that I'm right about this and that you, Stephen Hawking, and Heinrich Olbers are wrong about this. I also don't believe we live in an infinite physical universe with no beginning. I just don't see how Olber's paradox lends any support to that belief.
Okay, so Olber's paradox is something that has been speculated about for several centuries, and it was one of the people who made it famous is a German astronomer named Heinrich Olbers. And the basic idea is, suppose the universe is infinitely big and that we're surrounded by stars on all sides. So if you went far enough out in space, you would eventually, in any direction, you would eventually hit a star, because there would be an infinite number of stars around us in an evenly distributed pattern. So if you go far enough out, you'd eventually hit a star. Now, if the universe is infinitely big and it has stars evenly distributed through it that way, and if it's infinitely old, then there will have been time for the light of those stars to reach Earth. And so every single patch in the sky, since there's a star out there somewhere, some finite distance away, there will be light reaching us from that star after an infinite amount of time, and therefore the night sky should be as bright as the face of the sun. And it's obviously not. So that's the question behind Olber's paradox. Why is the night sky dark? Now, it seems to me that the problem that Bob is having is he's thinking of light as intermittent. He talks about if a star is far enough away, we'll only be getting 1 photon per year, decade, or century. And actually, that wouldn't be the case. Once a star flips on, once it ignites, it gets enough mass that it starts burning its nuclear fuel, it emits photons continuously, just like our sun does. It's continuously emitting photons, and since we're close to the sun, we get a lot of photons or light particles from the sun. So if a star is very distant, it's true, we won't be receiving as many photons from it. And if it's very, very far away, then we could be receiving only like a single particle of light, a single photon from that star. It's so far away that all the other photons it emits go elsewhere. But we get this one because if you go far enough out in space, there's going to be a star there. And we should, after infinite amount of time, be getting at least 1 photon from it. So if you imagine the entire sky being filled with these stars, even if we're only getting 1 photon from them continuously, the whole sky should still light up. And that's a clue that either the universe is not infinitely big or it's not infinitely old. Now we know that the physical universe is at least 200 times as big as the visible universe. We've been able to do measurements of the shape of the universe that show us the physical universe is at least 200 times bigger than what we can see. We don't know if it's infinite or not in size, but we do have evidence that it's not infinite in time because of the Big Bang. And the Big Bang, which occurred about 13.8 billion years ago, is the reason the sky is dark. Because after the Big Bang, everything blew up, and there has not been time for light to reach us from these very distant locations. And so the fact the sky is dark is actually evidence that the universe had a beginning.
I love it. And 13.8 billion years or whatever it is, that's a lot of time, but that's not even close to infinite.
Nope.
It's, as a matter of fact, infinitely far from infinite.
That's right.
Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. More weirdness coming up right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and he desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of his will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
Jesus told us to carry our cross daily.
Does yours sometimes seem too heavy?
That's our topic on Monday on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now more of Catholic Answers Live.
Not only is it weird questions with Jimmy Akin, it's unexpected groovy music with Jimmy Akin, and Sarah is looking shocked that groovy music is playing. Did you not know that that was going to play? Oh, well, I'll say thank you anyway. We always enjoy the groovy music. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Jimmy Akin's our guest, which always is good when you're doing weird questions with Jimmy Akin. It's not the same to do weird questions with Jimmy Akin when you're not here.
Have you been doing weird questions with other people?
I just sit here and read the questions and nothing happens.
Okay.
Yeah, they're terribly boring shows. So next one comes from John. Not being an expert on Thomas Aquinas, this one caught me off guard. I was asked if Thomas views God as being outside of time, and therefore if there is time in heaven. I wasn't quite sure where to find the answer, but the question is basically if the conclusion of Thomas' belief about motion meant that heaven would be an eternal moment, so I guess everyone would be sitting around in front of God, frozen like statues. Is this anywhere close to what we can what can reasonably be understood from his writings? Also, if there's no time or movement in heaven, how can the saints hear our prayers or intercede for us? Is this just a big misunderstanding?
So this one comes up a lot, and it's understandable why it comes up. It's frankly because people get sloppy in how they talk about this, and it leads to confusion. So John is right that Aquinas does believe that God is outside of time. It's also common to talk about us going to heaven and being with God. And people kind of infer from that, well, okay, if God's outside of time and we go to be with God, then we're going to be outside of time and we're going to be frozen like statues, and that doesn't seem to correspond to the idea of us being able to worship God in heaven or us being able to intercede for people on earth or things like that. The problem is caused by the going to be with God image. That is not physical. God does not have a physical location. That is not a unique physical location. He is omnipresent. He is everywhere in space and time by his power, because by his power, he is creating everywhere in space and time. If there's a place or a time, it wouldn't exist if God wasn't creating it right now. And so God, as a result, we talk about God being everywhere, including heaven. Now, heaven does not really mean up in the sky. That's a metaphor that God uses to help us understand that it's a different place than here, and because humans associate up with goodness, things are more important if they're bigger or taller or higher.
Okay.
If they're exalted, in other words, it becomes this heaven or the sky becomes an image that's metaphorically suitable to describe God and where he is, which has to be the best. But it's not the case that he literally occupies a place up in the sky or anywhere else in this universe that's uniquely his place, the way where you're sitting, Si, behind a microphone is uniquely your place. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about being with God in heaven, that's a spiritual form of union. Now, obviously, our resurrection bodies are going to be somewhere, but where Scripture depicts that as happening is here on earth, on the restored, renovated new earth. So we will continue to have a physical location, and we will be in spiritual heavenly union with God, but we do not go outside of time. And that's clear and the same thing is true of angels. The church teaches that if you're a creature, you have some kind of existence in space and time. So there are no creatures that don't at least occupy time. And that's not to say that time doesn't work differently in the afterlife than it works here. Since John was asking about St. Thomas Aquinas in particular, he viewed the afterlife, at least prior to the resurrection, and also the way angels experience time as somewhat different than we do. He recognized God as being in eternity, which means outside of time, and us as being fully in time in this life. And he proposed a middle state for angels and departed human souls. And this middle state he called aviternity. And it shares some properties of time and some properties of eternity. So it's not strictly exactly like one or the other. It's different than both. And that's a fine theological speculation. It's only a speculation. It could be that time works exactly the same way in the afterlife or for angels that it works for us. But it's clear that there is something time-like about what angels and departed human souls experience, because in both cases we see them experiencing things in a sequence. So when, in the case of a human, you die, you experience the particular judgment If you need to go to purgatory, you go to purgatory. Once you get purified from in purgatory, you go to heaven, and then you're in heaven, and then the resurrection comes, and you get your body back, and you experience the general judgment, and you then live in the eternal order on the new earth. And in all of that, you do other things. While you're in heaven or even purgatory, you may be praying for people on earth. In the eternal order, it's said that we're going to reign with Christ, and reigning means doing stuff. So it's clear that there's a sequentiality to the future of human experience. We see the same thing with angels. Angels were created at some point. They had a decision to make for or against God. In the case of good angels, they periodically come down and do stuff. So they experience sequentiality. In the case of demons, it's even more interesting because most of them, or at least many of them, are still running around loose. Some of them have been, according to Scripture, chained in pits of darkness and are reserved for the final judgment. So some of them have this creation, fall, get chained up, later experience the final judgment. Others are running around, but then one day they're also going to experience judgment. And so we see a sequentiality both for humans and for angelic beings, and thus both of us have to experience at least something like time, and maybe time exactly as we experience it.
Wow. John, thank you for the question. It does leave me with this, Jimmy, if I may. Mm-hmm. Does that mean all of that, what you just said, that Jesus, in becoming incarnate, he too never, in his human nature, never goes completely outside of time? He too exists in time with us.
He exists in some form of time and something at least like space, because he took his body with him into heaven. Right. So heaven as it presently is, which is different than what it'll be on the new earth, but heaven as it presently is at least capable of receiving a physical body. Whether that physical body is extended in space exactly the way our bodies are, we can't know, but it's at least capable of receiving a physical body.
John, I'm really happy that you gave us that question. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. There are more weird questions coming up. We're going to take a quick break. Don't forget, it's spring. We've got the spring sale going on, 15 to 25% off everything at shop.catholic.com. As a matter of fact, in some cases, a few cases, more than 25% off. Visit shop.catholic.com and get your spring savings.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
People often wonder about the power of prayer. Why do we pray anyway if we end up having to do so much work for ourselves? So the reality is, we find ourselves up against a wall and we pray. It's like God turns a light up on the other side of that wall, brighter and brighter and brighter until the light shines through the tiniest cracks. God might not do it all for me, but He shows me how to make my work more efficient so that together we can accomplish all things through His grace.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. So happy to be with you on this Friday afternoon or evening or early morning, Saturday, depending on where you are listening live around the world. Jimmy Akin is our guest. He's the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. He's the author of a whole bunch of books, including The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness, and Where to Find It. And he's senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. And in addition to all of that, he likes weird questions. So we love to do weird questions with Jimmy Akin.
I like them because they give you a workout. You know, so many questions. I mean, I've been doing this now since at Catholic Answers for 28 years this June, and after a certain point, a lot of the questions, it's like, okay, hit the hotkey, here comes the macro, here's the answer. They're a little bit old hat, but these make you think, and I like that.
Do you just kind of feel almost like my mouth is giving the answer, my brain is I can do what I like. All right, the next one, maybe you'll help me. I think Wojciech would be how I would pronounce this name. How would
Wojciech? Yeah,
Wojciech. Okay.
Woy, because
okay,
Wojciech.
I have discovered that Wojciech. If I discovered that someone has an object that can be spiritually dangerous to someone, would it be a sin to secretly take it and dispose of it without that someone's consent? If it can be done without his notice, and if it can be presumed that he wouldn't give up that object if informed about its danger. I'm talking primarily about objects that don't have much morally acceptable uses. For example, let's say my friend got a bunch of old books and magazines and asked for help sorting them. In doing that, I found pornographic material, and because I know my friend, I know it may be dangerous for him. Would it be a sin or theft if I took the dangerous material, destroyed it without informing the owner? What can be morally done in this kind of situation?
So the sin of theft is taking property against the reasonable will of its legal owner. And if it's true that that whatever you find, whether it's pornography or something else, if it's not reasonable for this person to retain it, you could take it without his consent and knowledge in this case. It would not be the sin of theft. Now, in making that assessment, you have a number of factors to consider. One of them is whether or not it really poses a spiritual danger to this person that is real and that doesn't have a compensating reason for. So, for example, back during the 1980s, President Reagan established like a panel to study pornography and make recommendations about how to fight it. And among the people that were appointed to that panel was James Dobson, the founder of Focus on the Family. And so Dobson had to view some things that were possibly pornographic in order to make evaluations and recommendations. So in that case, even though there was a danger to him looking at these things and being able to say, okay, him and other people on the panel, is this pornography or not? Where should we draw the line, and how can this be regulated? Because you have to know what you're regulating if you're going to regulate it. Somebody has to look at that stuff to make a determination and craft the policies. And so there was a compensating reason, even though there was some risk. Our job in life as Christians is not to avoid all risk. If you try to avoid all risk and all temptation, you're not going to actually be living the Christian life, because you're going to be living under a rock, and it's not going to be healthy for you, and you're not going to be doing good for other people, which is what Dobson and the other panelists were trying to do. Okay? They were trying to find ways to craft policies that would protect other people from pornography, and that meant they had to have some degree of exposure themselves. So we're assuming that's not the case. And in a typical situation, if you know someone who's had a pornography problem and they get a lot of books from somewhere, okay, well, you can presume that there's not some counterbalancing good if it's pure pornography. You look at a magazine and it's like, oh wow, okay, let's get this out of here. But you have to be careful with this, because it may not, if it's not obvious pornography, then it may not pose the same risk. For example, I can imagine some people in this situation being kind of scrupulous, and they don't find a pornographic magazine, but they may find a romance novel, and they don't know what's in the romance novel. Is this one of the pornographic ones, or is this Jane Eyre?
Yeah.
And I can see people being kind of scrupulous about that, or it could be Romeo and Juliet or whatever it may be. not every story involving romance is going to pose a moral challenge to everybody. And so you have to be careful in evaluating things like this. You can't just say, oh, it's in this area, so I'm going to steal it to protect this guy. Also, there are other things that have perfectly legitimate uses. Like, let's say the guy is asking you to help go through an attic of stuff from his grandfather that he's inherited. And in the attic, you find a gun. Well, guns have perfectly legitimate uses, whether it's target practice or self-defense or whatever it may, or hunting. Just because you found a gun doesn't mean, oh, I better take this away from this guy. Now, if he's mentally unstable and can't responsibly own a gun, that's one thing. But you have to be careful in evaluating these things. Also, you have to evaluate the consequences of taking the item, because if he finds out you took it, what is that going to do to your friendship? That's a factor that has to be weighed. Also, what is it going to do to his view of Christians? If he looks at you and says, you're this crazy moralizing Christian that's trying to run my life, that could push him away from God, rather than setting a better example that's more loving and open. If you come across as this strict moralizer who has no tolerance for other people's views, you can actually push someone away from Christ. This is something St. Paul talks about in his letter to the Romans, where he tells some of his Jewish readers that God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And in the same way, we Christians have to look out for that, we Gentile Christians included. Also, there are simple practical preservation reasons. Like, let's suppose you find a weapon in the attic and your friend is mentally unbalanced. Well, okay, if you can get that weapon away safely without him knowing, fine. But you also need to take into account he's mentally unbalanced. If he finds out, he might try to kill me, and I might have a family that depends on me. So maybe I should call in the authorities or something instead of doing it myself. So there are a bunch of things to think about here, but in principle, it is possible to not commit the sin of theft as long as you're taking something as long as it's not contrary to the reasonable will of the owner. So if it's not reasonable for him to have this, you could take it for his protection or the protection of others.
All right. Thanks very much for the question, Wojciech. I appreciate that. I hope that was helpful to you. We're going to go to Lisa in Houston, Texas. Her weird question for Jimmy Akin. Would or could Lazarus have had a near-death experience?
Well, since he died and came back from it, he had a full death experience.
That's as near as you can get.
Could say he had a near-death experience, but the term is ambiguous. There actually are a variety of phenomena that are reported as occurring near death. These can include things like crisis apparitions. A crisis apparition is where someone is either dying or about to die or otherwise in danger. They're in some kind of crisis, and they appear to people, who are distant. Maybe a loved one suddenly sees dad as he's as he's dying, or has a dream about dad as he's dying. I know a friend that happened to. Also, the people who are in danger of death or are about to die often will have visionary experiences. They may sense the presence of angels or loved ones in the room. They may see a glimpse of what the next world is like. This happened to an uncle of mine who actually didn't die, but he was close to death, and he was talking about all the amazing, beautiful things he was seeing. So these are reported phenomena that occur to a large number of people. Now, the classic near-death experience that I suspect that that Lisa is talking about here. Oh, and by the way, my uncle lives in Houston even. But the classic near-death experience that I suspect Lisa in Houston is talking about is the kind that was popularized or discussed in a popular way by Raymond Moody in his book Life After Life back in the 1970s, and that has been kind of standard in the literature ever since. Basically, people clinically die, And then when they come back, they report various things, which can include floating above their body and seeing what people are doing to them as they're trying to bring them back. It can include going through a dark tunnel. It can include meeting friends and loved ones. It can be having a review of everything you've done in your life. It could be encountering an angel or Jesus. It could be seeing a beautiful environment where there are happy people and so forth. These are all commonly reported elements. Not everyone sees the same things or reports the same things when they come back, perhaps because this is a non-physical experience and it's hard to cram all that into a physical brain once their heart gets started again. So they may lose certain aspects of the experience. But it's quite possible that Lazarus may have had all of those kind of things happen to him. Whether he would have remembered them when he got back into his body or how much he would have remembered them is a question we really don't have the answer to. By the way, in Star Trek, the Search for Whales, after they've got Spock back in his body.
That's not the name of it. It's not Star Trek, The Search for Whales.
It's how I think of it. It's
okay,
the Voyage Home. But after they've gotten Spock's soul back in his body at the end of Star Trek 3, in Star Trek 4, McCoy asks him, so you've really been where no man has gone before. I mean, you died. What can you tell me about it? And Spock just says, it would be impossible to discuss the phenomenon without a common frame of reference.
But as far as Lazarus goes, though, he did die.
He did die.
He did die.
He did die. He was dead for 4 days, and then he got brought back.
All right. Next weird question for Jimmy Akin. Jot Baleos asks, "Hi, Mr. Akin. I am a fan of your podcast and books because it keeps my faith burning and not burning out. My question is, if Jesus had children, would his children be demigods or just normal humans?"
So if Jesus had children, there are two things that we need to think about here. The first one is Jesus's divine nature, which is the reason he's God, and the second is his human nature. Now, in the case of like Greek demigods, like Heracles, or as he's known by the Romans, Hercules, he's a half-breed. He's the son of Zeus and a mortal woman. And this shows us that the Greek gods are, scientifically speaking, the same species as humans because they're capable of breeding with us. And so if the Greeks had known about DNA, presumably God DNA, like Zeus has, would be different than regular human DNA, but it's compatible with human DNA. Now, they didn't know about that, but what they did say in their mythology was that, people like Heracles or Hercules have some qualities that are like ordinary humans, so they're not full gods, but they have other qualities that are like the gods of Olympus. And so they have qualities that are a mixture of the two. And today we would explain that in terms of DNA, which is part of our physical nature. So Jesus has a divine nature, and his divine nature is indivisible and it's immutable, and therefore it could not be inherited by any children that he might have had. So they would not be divine for that reason. What they would inherit is DNA from his human nature, but we don't have any reason to think that his DNA was dramatically different than our DNA, than regular human DNA, because he didn't have a superhuman nature. He had a human nature. And so consequently, the children presumably would be humans and fairly normal humans. They might be unfallen, though, because Jesus has an unfallen nature, and thus he could, and certainly if he chose to, he could pass on original innocence to purely human offspring. But this is all speculative, and it's something that we probably shouldn't speculate too much about. But no, his children would not be demigods if he had chosen to have children.
Jot Baleos, thank you so much for the question. Appreciate that. Jimmy Akin, our guest, answered a lot of weird questions. If you like Jimmy's weird questions, check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You've got, 100 and how many episodes now?
As of next week, it'll be 150. We're doing our 150th episode. It's a mysterious update on updates for all different kinds of mysteries we've covered over the last 2 years.
And this week, it's people just
spontaneous
blowing
human
up.
combustion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Spontaneous human combustion. Do you know what's next week yet? Because I might just look forward to that one. And
well, it's the mysterious updates. 150th anniversary.
Oh, that's next week. Gotcha.
And the week after that is the Cold War Operation Northwood's secret plan.
All right. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks very much. I got to work with you a lot this week, and I've always liked that.
Always a pleasure.
All right. That'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.